There we go. Okay, well, thank you so much to everybody, Dr. Data, for helping put all this together. We're going to speak now for a little while across these slides on H. pylori, and then we're going to have some labs to review, and then we're going to have time for questions. And so we got so many pre-questions before we even started doing this talk that I thought I'd try to allow extra time for questions. You guys are welcome to download the slides later on, and you can see there's some information we're going to skip over as I do the lecture, but we're going to focus more on clinical application and question answering. And I reviewed all the questions yesterday, and they're really good questions, and they're the questions that every clinician asks all the time in all the classes that I teach. So we might as well go through those because those will help you probably more than watching a bunch of my slides fly by. All right, so let's take a look here. This is me for those that are brand new. So we did a study. I did a study with the Mayo Clinic in 2016. It was published, and we took 25 women and we looked at their stress indicators and their gut function. 9 out of the 25 women had H. pylori, and in the protocols I'm going to talk about today, 8 out of those 9 H. pyloris were cleared. And we actually published this. It's out there. If you Google Dan Kalish, Larry Bergstrom, Mayo Clinic study, it'll pop up. You can read it. It's online for free. And there's a lot of detail in there about all this. But I think the key point of the study and the key point of why I've been so successful teaching how to treat H. pylori is because it's never really about the pathogen, is it? Ever. I mean, if you guys have been in practice for a while, you know how when a patient goes ballistic on you in some strange way, it's never about you. It's about some other underlying problem that they have. And with H. pylori, the other underlying problem is the stress response and the status of your microbiome. And if you're stressed out of your mind, which most people are that we deal with, and your microbiome is a big mess, then H. pylori is going to be highly problematic. And if you, as a practitioner, test and treat their adrenals and their stress response or their neurotransmitters, however you deal with stress, and you deal with their diet and get their microbiome better, then you can clear H. pylori in a really straightforward manner. Okay, so I've been in practice forever. It's over 30 years now. And in fact, I'm at the age where you try to diminish the number of years you've been in practice. I think it's like 33 years. Wow. Okay. Anyways, I've been doing this a long time and I've been treating H. pylori this entire time. And I didn't get very good at it on my own. I was taught how to do this by Dr. Bill Timmons, and I have replicated exactly what Bill taught me in the early 90s. And I have taught that then to a couple thousand other doctors. And it turns out this works not just for me and for Dr. Bill Timmons, but for everybody that learns this specific way of dealing with H. pylori. You can be super successful with it too. Okay. And then we have a new class that I put together. So I spent about 12 years working with Richard Lord, who's one of our sort of preeminent scientists in the functional medicine space. He's long retired now, retired a long time ago. So most of you probably don't know about Richard. But he's been very interested in the microbiome, and he and I worked together for maybe about 4 or 5 years with him training me and how the microbiome works. And I finally put it together into a course. So if you've always kind of wondered, how it works and why it works and what you can do to treat, if there is such a word, even treat the microbiome, then this class is for you. You can come and learn all about it at this GI Protocol Design microbiome class. It's coming up pretty soon in May, and you get a nice discount for being a doctor's data customer. You get 25% off that code. Okay. So for today, we're going to focus on H. pylori. And I think the main reason why it trips people up so much is because they don't realize it's the stress component that really triggers the infection to flare. And that if you don't address the stress component, the odds on getting the H. pylori cleared out, regardless of whatever treatment you use, maybe drop to like 30 or 40 or 50% or something. And it becomes a fair fight. In other words, you trying to fight the H. pylori, whether it's with an antibiotic or with a herbal protocol, the H. pylori just fights back basically if you don't deal with the stress component and the microbiome component. But if you have the microbiome in great shape and that person's good or commensal bacteria kind of are like an army for you to, suppress the H. pylori, and you deal with the whole cortisol secretory IgA stress response thing. So you've got an upregulation of the immune system. You've got a balancing effect of the microbiome, and you can crush H. pylori. But if you don't do those two things first, you're again, it's going to be a fair fight, and you're going to lose a lot of the time. You don't want it to be a fair fight. You want to be overwhelmingly crushing the H. pylori. How do you get the microbiome back online? You can take that class I just showed you, but if you know how to do it kind of obviously, right? It has to do with what you eat and clearing up dysbiosis and other kinds of things that go on with the gut. And then how you deal with the stress response, you test and correct the adrenals. So that's your setup for all this. Um, Now, what's really strange about H. pylori, once you've been doing this for a while, is just the variety of problems that it causes. And I think that has a lot to do with the effect that H. pylori has on the gut and inflammation. And in addition to generating inflammation that everyone gets from H. pylori, it also is sort of known for screwing up your protein assimilation, and your body just doesn't break down proteins great when there's an infection in your stomach where you're supposed to be initiating the breakdown of protein. So you often will see H. pylori cases that have really wrecked amino acid levels if you're checking plasma amino acids or urinary amino acids. And those two, are very closely aligned. And then once you don't have enough amino acids, then you can have problems all throughout the body. And so, more than many infections, H. pylori can cause just about anything. I think that's true for a lot of infections, but H. pylori is sort of extra special in its target of messing up the patient's ability to absorb sufficient amounts of protein and get the amino acids they need to make proteins in the body. So there are, on the surface, common H. pylori symptoms that are obvious that we all know, like where there's nausea, bloating, those kinds of things. But what's more important and more interesting are the non-obvious H. pylori symptoms like depression or fatigue, brain fog. Could be any of those. Low sex drive. So H. pylori can manifest in a whole variety of ways. It's oftentimes, maybe more often than it causes GI problems, it causes non-GI problems. Why? Because it's generating inflammation, and the inflammation is going to screw things up. It's going to cause problems with your blood sugar and insulin. It's going to cause oxidative stress. It's going to cause all these different issues. And, it's messing with your protein assimilation and amino acid assimilation. So now the obvious case, well, first of all, the take-home message on that is that you should run H. pylori testing on every single patient that you work with. In fact, this is the way I was trained, Dr. Timmons. Just you run a stool test on every single patient. Doesn't matter what the complaint is, if they're recovering from cancer, or they want, to lose weight, or they're 10 years old. We had two 10-year-old kids in class this last couple of weeks that had H. pylori. Got to screen kids. Just because they're 10 years old doesn't mean they're going to not have H. pylori. It could be older adults. We had a 79-year-old a couple hours ago in the class that I taught that had H. pylori. So you're going to see this across the whole age spectrum. The 10-year-old kids, they may have ADD, ADHD. They may not have tummy problems. 79-year-old adult that we just looked at, she didn't have any GI issues at all. She had fatigue and depression. So you want to run a GI 360 on every single patient that walks in the door. And I just found out a few minutes ago, it's $40 to add H. pylori. So it used to be a lot more a long time ago, not with doctor's data, but 20 years ago when I was doing H. pylori, I would always add it, and I was always cringe because it was like another $100, $150. But for $40, just add it. Add H. pylori to every single patient that you test, and then test every single patient with the GI workup, regardless of what their symptoms are. That's the central premise of functional medicine, is that we need to look at the gut regardless of symptoms. Okay. Now, specifically, again, H. pylori causes damage to the stomach lining. It's going to reduce stomach acid production. Then you can have this whole trigger of other symptoms. Now, the interesting thing is that if you have a perfectly balanced microbiome, which basically none of our patients do, then, but you can achieve if you eat right, if you have a perfectly balanced microbiome and you're not particularly stressed, H. pylori can be protective. It can be neutral. There's all kinds of manifestations of it. It can be a full-on pathogen if your system is weak enough, and it can actually be just hanging out, not causing problems if the circumstances of the rest of your body are in good shape. But not too many people that we work with are stress-free, and not too many people that we work with have a balanced microbiome. So it seems like H. pylori is causing the problem, but there are these other issues. We had this patient 10 years ago. It wasn't my patient. It was someone in the mentorship class. And she was British, which is kind of random, but she was from an aristocratic family. She had never driven a car. She had lived in this family estate for her whole life. She was like in her 70s or something like that. She had a chauffeur. I imagine it was a Bentley or Rolls Royce. I don't really know. But she's just, really wealthy, but landed gentry, kind of like, naturalist. She's out there in the woods on her estate. She's totally stress-free life. Adrenal labs were perfect. Okay, but how often do you see that? For most of us that have children or loved ones or jobs or cars that we have to operate and get to work in, the stress levels are pretty high, which explains why H. pylori is such a big problem. It's not like the H. pylori bug is the issue, right? It's the circumstances that we've created. So if you have a few minutes later on this week, just type into Google or your favorite search engine, H. pylori Nobel Prize report or committee report, because they gave out the Nobel Prize in medicine a little while ago to the scientists that discovered that H. pylori is the cause for most, but not all ulcers. And it's an interesting read. It's a couple pages long. These are images from that report, but there's a one-liner in that report that I read years ago. I think it came out in like 2005. And it says something like, H. pylori doesn't always cause GI symptoms. This is the Nobel Prize Committee, okay? But in every patient with H. pylori, there is inflammation. And now we know that inflammation is at the root of depression and metabolic disorders and just about every disease known to humankind, autoimmunity and everything, right? So if you have H. pylori in a patient, because you're testing every patient, even if they have no GI symptoms, you want to get rid of it because, according to the Nobel Prize Committee, everybody with H. pylori has inflammation, and that becomes not only GI inflammation, but becomes systemic if you have it for a long time. Okay, so that's kind of the central reason why we're going after this bug so aggressively. You can get it from uncooked foods, undercooked or uncooked chicken or eggs. You can get it from kissing somebody that has it. If somebody else got it from food and then you kiss them, you could get it. You can often see it present in more than one family member. And a lot of people have it, but are not symptomatic because they're not stressed enough and their gut is in good enough shape that they're okay with it. So it's not a guarantee if you have H. pylori that you're going to be symptomatic. So the problem with that statement, though, is that you can't tell what H. pylori symptoms are. You can't just say you have H. pylori and you have no GI symptoms, so I'm not going to treat it. Because if they have any symptom that's related to inflammation, I think you should go after the H. pylori. You don't have to do it. You do not have to do it aggressively with medications. I think that's sort of risky. Uh, you'd only want to use medications if they have, some really severe health problem. But for those people who are just experiencing chronic inflammation from H. pylori, then you can go at it with a herbal antimicrobial program, and those are totally safe. You're not going to regret doing that. You're not going to screw somebody up. But you don't want to put people on 2 weeks of antibiotics just on a whim, right? So we want to test for it. We want to eliminate it. You want to put the good bugs back in terms of treatments, and then you have to retest. People don't retest in our industry. I don't know what's up with that, but it was drilled into me like it was a requirement. If you're going to test, you got to retest because if you're bothering to test and you find it, you better make sure that you got it and that it's gone. In the Mayo Clinic study, we tested, and at the 6-month mark, we retested, and 8 out of 9 of those women that had H. pylori, we got rid of it. You got to know that. You got to know what if you treated it and it didn't work and it's still there? You need to know that. So don't just test and then treat and then let people go. Give them, a certain number of months and then make sure that you retest just to make sure that it's gone. There's nothing better than getting a clean test back where everything's normal. That's a great experience. You want that. That's what you're looking for. That's victory, right? So in terms of protocols, H. pylori treatment, either with herbal treatments or antibiotics. In some cases, antibiotics are warranted. We had a case recently. In fact, we have a pediatrician in my mentorship class, and she has become the H. pylori whisperer. And she was talking about this in class a few weeks ago. It's wonderful to see because this is all brand new to her. As pediatrician, she started doing, functional medicine big time. She's testing all these kids, and she's like, Dan, everybody that I treat with this H. pylori protocol you taught us gets better. And she's like eczema. She's on a lucky streak here, but like 5 kids, 10 kids, boom, 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 boom. Eczema, test him, H. pylori, treat, gone. Eczema, H. pylori, test him, treat, gone. This stuff really works. And you don't have to use medications. You can if you need to escalate to that level, but you can absolutely get H. pylori successfully with the natural programs. You want to couple it with an anti-inflammatory diet, and then you want to treat any other pathogens that are present. And it's common that if someone has H. pylori, stomach acid levels are weak, that other bugs are going to get in. It can happen. Does happen frequently. You can treat with a Prev pack, and there are cases where this makes sense. That pediatrician I just mentioned, she's doing this all with, over-the-counter non-prescription herbals. But there may be moments when it's appropriate, like if you have a bunch of infections stacked up. This has come up a few times in class recently where the doctor presents a case and the patient has H. pylori plus crypto or H. pylori plus giardia or H. pylori plus a couple of other infections. And sometimes it's just more efficient to use medications. So I see medications as the last resort, but not to be avoided entirely. Mastica works incredibly well. It's from a tree. It's been around for like a couple of thousand years as a tonic and sort of booster for stomach function. It's not like a new, we just learned about this kind of thing. It's like literally been used for a couple of thousand years. It's pretty effective. You don't really see a lot of negative side effects with it, and it's incredibly potent. So Mastica is an H. pylori killer, and then you can couple it with something that's anti-inflammatory, like slippery elm. DGL is used a lot, those tablets you can chew on, and you want, or zinc carnosine is often used, something that's calming the stomach down so the mastica can get in and kill. And then you want to do either prebiotics or probiotics or both. I use both. And then, GI repair, you want the whole system to heal once you've got the infection gone or cleared out. Children, we just talked about, that was I don't know, really. I mean, if I think about it, it's maybe one of the happier days in my career when that pediatrician said that she's treating kids left and right for H. pylori. Because I realized, wow, I can take a deep breath. I'm kind of old now, I just want to relax, maybe go on my bike. And I know that there's a pediatrician out there who is just fixing kids left and right. And that it's not up to me to try to save the world anymore. There's like new doctors coming in that really get this at a high level. Lots of kids have GERD. It's been a specialty area of my practice for a long time, and they may have ADD or ADHD. They may have stomach pain. I can't go to school, mom. They may just get sick every time they eat pizza. I had this one summer years ago where we just had kid after kid after kid, from like this high school football player, he couldn't play football anymore, to, 8, 9-year-old kids that are just nauseous and vomiting every morning. For some reason, H. pylori is most often missed, in these kinds of cases. And if you just screen a person, run a GI 360, spend the extra $40 to get the H. pylori, you'll see what I mean. And these kids respond incredibly well to these treatments that we're talking about, incredibly well. And it's not just eczema, right? There's a whole variety of things. From the whole ADD, ADHD spectrum is often a gut-brain connection thing, fatigue and depression, energy problems, and obviously stomach pain. A lot of these young kids have stomach pain. They're never screened for H. pylori. Anyways, you're going to do it. So you can also have H. pylori and other things at the same time. What I say to patients, and I think this is kind of funny, I don't know if they do, is that you're entitled to more than one problem at the same time. So you can have H. pylori plus a different infection. And you'll often see H. pylori plus a parasite. The theory is that once the stomach is shot and you're not making enough stomach acid, it's easier for other bugs to get in. Okay, so this has been researched pretty carefully. Cryptosporidium, blastocystis, there's a whole bunch of bugs that are on this list of, if you have H. pylori, you might also have this bug as well. So just keep your eyes open for that. You want to treat, obviously, whatever you find on the labs. Integrated treatment program. So adrenal support, stress management, getting the inflammation under control for that first couple of months. Then around the beginning of month 3, so you're 3 months into this program now, then you're like, okay, now we're going to go after the H. pylori. You got to wait. You got to wait that first couple of months because you're sorting out the lifestyle, you're getting them to relax, you're getting them to meditate or exercise less or whatever it is they need to do. You're doing whatever you do for the adrenals. I use these DHEA and pregnenolone protocols, but whatever you do to support the adrenals, to reduce inflammation, get the diet cleaned up, you're doing that for about 2 months. You're setting the stage to raise their secretory IgA up, to improve it so their immune response in the gut is getting stronger and stronger. The healthy food, that's the adrenal program, right? Cortisol regulates SIG-A. So as you reduce their stress and improve their adrenals, you're strengthening the immune response in the mucosal tissues in the gut, secretory IgA. You're then also using this diet that's anti-inflammatory, so you're reducing inflammation, improving the microbiome. And then around the beginning of the third month, you nuke it. You just go after the H. pylori aggressively, and you'll get it like 8 out of 9 times, most of the time. Okay, not all the time, but most of the time. You should be in that 8 out of 9 range, like we were in the Mayo Clinic study. Let's see. And in the Mayo Clinic study, those 25 women were picked purposefully as being in very high stress situations. That was the whole point of the study, was to find 25 women who were stressed, and then see how well adrenal and GI treatments worked. At first, we were going to do 25. Well, we were sitting around with the Mayo Clinic people I was doing the study with. This is kind of a funny story. And we're like, what are we going to do the study on? And I'm like, I don't know, we're going to 25 people. And then one of them, Brent, was like, hey, we got them right here. Why don't we use 25 like nurse practitioners at Mayo Clinic? They're stressed out of their mind. We all work too hard. And we all started laughing. And he was serious though. We looked into it. It was like kind of like politically problematic to do that. So then I said, hey, what about where I am? I live right near Silicon Valley. I know a lot of women who are in executive positions in tech companies, and they're all stressed out of their mind. And everybody was like, yeah, let's do that. So we ended up picking 25 women who were in executive positions in Silicon Valley in the tech industry, which immediately means that you're stressed out of your mind, right? They're working 80 hours a week. And that was the group that we did the study on. And even in those people, we did 2 months of the adrenal stuff, and then we got rid of H. pylori with most of them. Okay. I think we talked about this. Severity, we talked about that already. Now, the confusing thing, I think this is incredibly confusing, is that H. pylori can be a full-on pathogen. It can play a role as a commensal, and then it can even be kind of positive. And that's true for a lot of different bugs, not all of them, but a lot of different microbes move in terms of what they're doing based on the health and functioning of your microbiome. So, anyways, if your gut is in really great shape, a lot of these infections that devastate people are far less problematic. My general philosophy on this, though, is that for anyone that I'm dealing with or that we see in the classes that I teach, those people are generally stressed enough that it's always worth treating H. pylori. I've really never had a patient where I or the patient regretted taking the time and energy and money to treat H. pylori. There's always a value to it, whether they sleep better, their depression goes away, whether their GERD is gone, whatever the symptomatic relief is. It's generally worth dealing with. So there's a whole bunch of slides in here that we're going to skip over. But I just want to point out, you can look at them later because you guys get copies of these. I just think this is really interesting and that you should study it if you're interested in it too. But it's this idea that the microbes in our gut, they have their own little lives. They have their own genes. Did you know that? Of course they do. They have their own proteins. This is a study about this. You can Google this later on if you want to read the study. And and guess what? They make their own metabolites. It's this whole other world. And there's like trillions of them. I don't know, depending on who you believe, somewhere between 10 trillion and maybe 100 trillion. So there's a lot of gut bacterial DNA in your body, like right now, making proteins and making metabolites. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why this is interesting, but the main reason why it's interesting is that if you have the right setup of microbes, then all of this is going to be to your benefit. It'll help these functions help regulate your immune system. They regulate your metabolism. They even indirectly through short chain fatty acids like butyrate regulate your brain. And so there's vast effects if these microbes are in a good shape. You're going to be slender and fit and not obese. Your brain is going to be crisp and functioning great. Your heart is going to be healthy. Your insulin response is going to be good. These genes and proteins that these bacteria that are associated with these bacteria are actually really, really important. And the metabolites from them are really important too. And there's some famous ones that you guys know. Like the most famous one is probably butyrate. So, in terms of what nurtures your microbiome, so this would be the beginning of the H. pylori treatment: fiber or prebiotics. That's like the most easiest thing you can imagine, right? Whether you can get fancy ones or you can use simple ones, whatever kind of fibers you want to use. But all the supplement companies carry different forms of fiber. And then one of the things that happens when you consume adequate amounts of fiber is that your body, or your bacteria, sorry, not your body, but the good bacteria make that, take that fiber, you can't digest it. They break it down and turn it into short chain fatty acids. And that butyrate, propionate, those are critical for your gut barrier to work right. They have anti-inflammatory actions. They help regulate the immune system. They help regulate your metabolism. And so that's what we're doing in that first couple months is we're getting that sorted out. Fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber from food, but I also do it in a supplement form for sure. You don't want to just wait around till the food does everything. So you start them on prebiotics, good quality fiber right away. And you're preparing for killing the H. pylori. And then the other part, the other sort of main food group for the good bacteria are polyphenols. So I don't know about you, but I eat berries every day. Why not? They're kind of expensive, aren't they? Raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, and then other ones that are similar, like pomegranate, cranberry. I eat those all the time, dried cranberries. So they're rich with polyphenols. These polyphenols are large molecular structures. Most of them can't get into your body. Most of them are fed upon by the good gut bacteria. And I think about this not every day anymore, but I used to, which shows a little bit how crazy I am when I'm eating my, I just bought them yesterday. It's $9.98 for a little thing of blueberries. And I'm thinking, man, okay, whatever, I'm going to splurge. But it's not for me. It's not, it's like a gift to my microbiome because I can't break down those polyphenols. So that's how I think about it now. I'm not buying this for myself because I probably wouldn't spend $10 on some blueberries for myself. It's so much money. But for my microbiome, hey, they're worth it. Okay. And so fiber and polyphenols are the keys to establishing a normal microbiome. And that's your main weapon, let's say, against the H. pylori. And then, of course, you need adequate amino acids because one of the things that H. pylori does, we talked about earlier, is it destroys your ability to absorb amino acids efficiently. So a lot of the people that you're working with are in kind of a breakdown state and they don't have enough amino acids to build things. And so just dumping in some free-form amino acids, usually it's like, 5 grams twice a day. Like that's a teaspoon of a free-form amino acid product twice a day on an empty stomach. That'll start to get the amino acid levels back up so they can make all the things the body needs to make to help them deal with the H. pylori. Okay, so then there's some details here about short chain fatty acids, and I'm going to skip over them so we have time for questions, but you're welcome to read these later. And then I think this is fascinating. Again, you can read this later. It's about the gut bacteria are making proteins too. It's wild. They use the same 20 amino acids that we do. It's just such a trip that that's even possible. Here's the 20 aminos. But the take home on all these slides is for most H. pylori patients, if they're having trouble healing or they have the eczema or they have some other kind of problem, give them some free-form amino acids or give them a protein powder so they can start to repair. That'll really speed things up. Okay. Now, I just want to remind people, and we're going to look at questions and labs. Here, these are the slides that were. So, remind people if you joined us late, we have a GI protocol design class coming up May 14th. If you're interested, you get a 25% discount with the doctor's data code. In these classes, there's online lectures that you listen to, kind of like today, but then there's lab review where we want you to submit your GI 360 with your add-on of H. pylori for yourself and for your patients. And let's go through this. All the practitioners that we train, we encourage you to test yourself first. Even if you feel great, it's just a good thing to do. And then to test friends, family, patients, etc. So if you're interested in this class, you have just enough time to order 5 or 6 GI 360s, add on the H. pylori. By the time you start to get the results back, this class will be starting, and then we can review them together during the live Q&A calls, and I can help you design protocols for each of the people that you test, right? So this is a practical hands-on course. We're interpreting your labs and your fellow students' labs. And then there's also a very detailed online curriculum as part of it also, okay? All right, so I'm going to just show you an example test, and we're right on schedule here, and we're going to have tons of time for questions. But let me just show you, because this can be a little intimidating for some people. So let's look at one of these, and then we'll go to questions. So first of all, you kind of we're all reliant upon the summary page here because it's so complicated. You got to look at the summary page and just take a deep breath and see what the science people are telling you. Where's the dysbiosis at? If it's in the red zone, not so good. Where's the diversity? That's the variety of the diversity of the different gut bacteria in the low zone. That's not good either, right? So you want low levels of dysbiosis, that would be the harmful bacteria, and you want a wide diversity of, wide variety of different organisms. And it's important to note that these organisms, the good bacteria, the good gut bacteria, are completely dependent upon one another. Forget about you for a minute. Like they are in it for themselves and they're in it for their community members. So as an example, there's these first line of gut bacteria that grab fiber. You got to eat the fiber first. So let's start with that. Or supply it in the form of a supplement. So and I don't think I've ever had a patient, except for maybe like one person, who eats enough fiber. So nobody eats enough fiber. Just do some dietary record things and then look at the total amount of fiber they're eating. Nobody eats even a fraction of the fiber that we're supposed to. So you're putting them on fiber now, and be careful. You got to titrate it up slowly because if you start too high, then they're going to get, gassy and have all kinds of symptoms. But you're starting them on foods that have fiber and then fiber itself. That stimulates the gut bacteria that need the fiber. They start to break that fiber down and make short chain fatty acids. And you can see on this particular person, the butyrate producing bacteria are not doing that well. If you can trigger that group of bacteria to grow, then there is a sequence of events that occurs where there's other groups of bacteria that need other things. Like there's some bacteria that produce hydrogen in the gut. There's another group of bacteria that consume that hydrogen that's made by that first group. So each group that you stimulate the growth of helps the other groups. And if this is all balanced out, then your diversity is in good shape because you have a wide range of these organisms. And they're different. You can kind of categorize the different names of organisms into general groupings of like we make hydrogen, we consume hydrogen, we make fatty acids, etc. There's some of them that make B vitamins, which is mind numbing. They make B vitamins as like a byproduct, and then they squirt the B vitamins out of their little bacterial bodies. And then there's other gut bacteria that use those B vitamins. Some of them can't make B vitamins, but they got like a neighbor that can. We use, I don't know, I think I read recently like somewhere around 10 or 15% of the B vitamins that you need are coming from these gut bacteria making B vitamins, but they're mostly making them for their friends, I think, more than they're making them for us. And so the breakdown products of these gut bacteria as they're doing their jobs are all kinds of things that are great for us and great for the other bacteria. It's pretty important. It's a complex system, but it involves all these different types of organisms. That's why that diversity score is so important. Because if your diversity is low, then these different functions are going to be compromised to a certain extent. And then pro-inflammatory, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. And then the part I look at, the most interesting, I think, is the key findings, because they do a nice summary here of the things that you should be on the lookout for, whether it's organisms or markers like elastase. So low elastase means you're low in pancreatic enzymes. And then obviously, if you have a lot of dysbiosis, that's something you might want to treat. And the one that we talked about a lot already is secretory IgA. You can see that marker there. So if secretory IgA is low, that means it's secretory immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins in the gut lining are not there. And these are secretory, they're mucosal membrane immune systems, key. They are the key to that. And so if your mucosal membrane immune response is weak, what do you think H. pylori is going to do? It's going to proliferate. So you got to get SIG-A up. That's why we test and correct cortisol, because that's one way, quick way to start to raise secretory IgA, so you can go after the bug. And then you can scroll through. These pages are kind of complicated, and most of these things, most of us can't even pronounce properly. That's why they do those summaries at the beginning. But it's nice to see the raw data if you're really into it. And there's some of these organisms that are kind of famous that you should know about, like Akkermansia. That's in the news all the time. You should know about that one. I think there's maybe 5 or 10 of these commensals that you should know inside and out, but I don't know that you need to memorize all 50 of them. And then this page here where you're looking for other bugs, right? If you have the initial bug, you might have other ones. Uh, and then here you can see yeast markers, etc. There's a lot of data on here, which is why, again, the summary pages are so helpful. And then here we get to the digestive markers where you can see things like inflammatory markers, short chain fatty acids we talked a lot about, IgA. This gives you a general sense of how the person's response is to the stresses of their life and to their diet and whatnot. And then here they have these guys. And then I want to show you one other thing here, just so you know. You can do H. pylori as an add-on. Now, what if you have an H. pylori patient and it's time to retest and they don't want to spend all that money to do the whole GI 360? Well, as a retest, you can order the H. pylori separately. Okay, that's totally fine. As a follow-up to make sure that you got it. If there were no other infections, but maybe don't need that whole other test to come back in again, you just reorder H. pylori by itself. And let's just look at one more real quick here. Diversity index, diversity score now is better. Dysbiosis index quite low. A few things here. Short chain fatty acids, you can actually give butyrate in a supplement form. I think it's one of the better supplements that's out there in the industry right now. There's a bunch of different companies that carry it, and it works so well. If you're not using butyrate, find a good quality company. There's a lot of strange and bad quality butyrate out there. But if you have a reputable company and you're using butyrate, it's an amazing product while you're getting the microbiome back online. Right? Okay, so let's open it up for questions and see what people are wondering about here. We have plenty of time to answer them.